Let's talk about something not often said but deeply felt. When the avoidant finally realizes you are never replaceable. You were the one who stayed when staying wasn't easy. You were the one who tried to reach someone who was trained by life to run, and even though it felt like your love was slipping through your fingers, you still offered it with open palms, not clenched fists. And here's the truth. At the time, they didn't see it. Not fully, not clearly. Because avoidance isn't a lack of feeling. It's a fear that feeling too much will break them. So when you loved them, it overwhelmed them. It threatened their armor. It made them question everything they thought kept them safe. So they pulled away. They distracted themselves, maybe even left, thinking they'd find something lighter, easier. But in the silence of your absence, something started to echo. The echo of your patience, the echo of your laughter, the echo of the moments when you held space for their messiness. And here's the part they never expected. No one else felt like you. Because what they're learning now, maybe for the first time, is that connection isn't about sparks. It's about safety. It's about someone seeing you even when you're not at your best and still choosing to stay. You were that person. Not perfect, not all-knowing, but real and rare. And now, maybe long after you walked away, they finally see. You weren't just another person they dated. You were the mirror they weren't ready to look into. But don't mistake their realization as your obligation. You gave enough. You showed up when it mattered. And now the lesson belongs to them. You're moving forward with your wholeness, with your heart intact, knowing full well you were never the one who was replaceable. They just took too long to realize it. Avoidant attachment isn't about not caring. That's one of the biggest misconceptions people have. On the surface, someone with an avoidant attachment style may seem cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. They might pull away when things get too intimate. They may shut down in conflict or act like they're fine with being alone. But beneath that, there's often a deep well of feeling they don't know how to express safely. Avoidant people typically didn't grow up feeling like emotional closeness was safe or consistent. Maybe they had caregivers who were neglectful or overly critical. Maybe showing emotion led to rejection or even punishment. So they learned, consciously or not, that needing others was dangerous and that independence was safer. Over time, they built walls around themselves, not because they didn't want connection, but because they were afraid of what it might cost them. They became experts at self-soothing, at avoiding vulnerability, at detaching before they could be hurt. When someone comes along and offers real emotional intimacy, when they offer presence, patience, and the kind of love that doesn't threaten but supports, it can feel unfamiliar. Even threatening, the avoidant person doesn't necessarily think, I don't want this. It's more like, this feels overwhelming. I don't know how to do this. If I get used to this, what happens when it goes away? Their instinct becomes to distance themselves, to find control in the detachment, because closeness feels like losing control. So often, their actions can hurt the very people who care most. They might not return affection when it's needed. They might go quiet during arguments instead of working things out. They might even act indifferent when someone walks away. But that's not because they don't care. It's because they're emotionally dysregulated and don't know how to bridge that gap. The person on the receiving end of this behavior can feel confused, unappreciated, or unloved. But the avoidant is struggling in a different way. Afraid to need, afraid to rely, afraid to risk being truly seen. This is why when someone consistent and emotionally available leaves their life, the avoidant often doesn't react right away. They might feel numb or relieved initially because emotions are compartmentalized. But slowly, in the quiet that follows, they begin to feel the absence. not just of the person, but of the safety that person brought. And it's only then they start realizing the truth, that the connection was rare, meaningful, and not something that can be replaced with distraction or new faces. Avoidants aren't emotionless. They're guarded. And when someone breaks through those walls, even briefly, it leaves a mark. It shakes their worldview. It challenges the narrative that says closeness equals pain. They might not have known what to do with that connection at the time, but eventually they come to understand it mattered, and that the person they pushed away was never just another option. They were someone irreplaceable. They don't realize your value until safety is gone. That's one of the most painful truths in a connection with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. When you're present, when you're showing up every day with love, patience, and effort, it's easy for them to take it for granted. Not because they're ungrateful or cruel, but because their mind is wired to prioritize distance as safety. Deep down, avoidants are constantly trying to protect themselves from emotional danger. And ironically, that often means pulling away from the very people who feel safest. While you're investing, they're evaluating. While you're getting closer, they're creating mental escape routes. The closer you get, the more real it feels, and the more real it feels, the more their fear kicks in. In their mind, emotional dependence is weakness. They might even convince themselves that your love is too much, that you're too intense, or that they need space to breathe. And when you finally walk away, after giving them chance after chance, something strange happens. Suddenly, the silence is louder than they expected. They thought they'd feel lighter, maybe even freer. But instead, there's a heaviness they can't quite explain, because it's only when you're gone that they begin to feel the full weight of what they lost. The text that doesn't come, the calls that used to check in, the feeling of being known and understood. These things, which they once dismissed or minimized, start to stand out in sharp contrast. They start to compare. New people might enter their life, and at first it feels like a clean slate, fresh energy, no pressure. But over time, they notice this new person doesn't laugh at their jokes the same way. They don't feel as seen. The conversations are surface level. The connection is easy but forgettable. And that's when the truth begins to sink in. What they had with you was different. It was rich. It was grounding. It was rare. Regret for an avoidant doesn't always come with fireworks or grand apologies. It creeps in quietly. It shows up late at night when they scroll through old photos. It shows up when they hear a song that reminds them of you. It shows up when something goes wrong in their life and they instinctively think of calling you, only to remember they can't. That's when the realization hits. You weren't just another chapter. You were the foundation they didn't know they were standing on. But the cruel twist is that they often don't realize any of this until it's too late. The comfort they used to resist becomes the absence they can't escape. And while they may want to come back to say they finally see you for who you were, by then you've likely grown. You've healed. You've seen your own worth, and that understanding may be something they now have to live with, not reclaim, because by the time they understand your value, your love may no longer be on offer. You showed up with consistency in a world they distrust, and that mattered more than you probably realized at the time. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, consistency isn't just comforting, it's terrifying, because consistency means reliability. It means presence, and presence means the possibility of being seen, depended on, and ultimately hurt. To someone who grew up learning that closeness leads to pain or rejection, your steady emotional availability was unfamiliar territory. It challenged everything they thought they understood about relationships. Avoidants often live in a mental and emotional world built on instability. Maybe they had to parent themselves from a young age. Maybe expressing needs led to punishment, or vulnerability was met with dismissal. Whatever the case, they developed an emotional reflex. Don't get too close. Don't rely on anyone. Don't let them rely on you. So when you showed up, not just once, not just when it was easy, but repeatedly, you disrupted that internal script. Every time you responded instead of retreating, every time you stayed through an emotional moment instead of walking away, you created a small fracture in their armor. You were proving without fanfare that it's possible to be known and still accepted, that it's possible to argue and still be loved, that it's possible to show up messy and still be held. But because their world had never shown them that kind of safety before, they didn't know what to do with it. In fact, your consistency may have even triggered more resistance from them, not because you were doing something wrong, but because what you were doing felt foreign. Sometimes avoidants interpret care as pressure. They mistake support for control. When someone is used to abandonment, even kindness can feel suspicious. So while you were simply loving them, they were often scanning for the trap, waiting for the moment you'd leave, preparing for the hurt before it could happen. But here's what's crucial. Your presence still made an impact. Even if they couldn't express it, even if they acted like it didn't matter, deep down, they noticed. Deep down, it registered that you were different. Not perfect, not without your own needs and flaws, but different in the way you stayed emotionally present when others might have given up. Different in the way you offered stability in a world they didn't know how to trust. And now, after you've stepped away, or after they've pushed you away, that consistency becomes even more obvious in hindsight. They start to realize how rare it was, how steady you were, how your love didn't flinch at the first sign of discomfort. And they compare that to the fleeting, conditional nature of other connections they encounter. It starts to hit them. You were the calm in their storm, not because you were perfect, but because you didn't play games. You were real, you were steady. And that's not something they'll forget, even if they never fully understood it while you were still within reach. Time reveals the depth of what they lost. That's the quiet truth most avoidants don't see right away. When someone with an avoidant attachment style experiences a breakup or emotional separation, they often don't react the way others expect. There's no immediate display of sadness, no begging or pleading. Instead, there might be indifference, silence, even a sense of relief. But that's not because they didn't care, it's because avoidance is rooted in emotional suppression. The feelings are there, they're just buried under layers of self-protection and disconnection. In the immediate aftermath of your absence, they distract themselves, they dive into work, they get busy, they convince themselves they're fine. For a while, it might even look like they've moved on effortlessly, and that can be excruciating for the one who gave their all. You might look at them and think, did I ever even matter? But what's really happening under the surface is a delay. Avoidants often process feelings slowly. Where others feel pain immediately, they feel it only once the silence stretches long enough that they can't ignore it anymore. As the weeks or months pass, the distractions stop working, the novelty of new people or solo freedom wears off, and that's when it begins to hit. The little things you used to do, the way you texted good morning, the way you remembered the things they didn't even say out loud, the way you showed care, not just through words, but through presence. These memories resurface, not as dramatic flashbacks, but as moments that quietly haunt their everyday life. Time has a way of revealing contrast. As they meet new people, they start to notice the difference. Maybe the new person doesn't understand their silences the way you did. Maybe they can't hold emotional space. Maybe they push too hard, or worse, detach in a way that feels eerily familiar. And for the first time, the avoidant sees themselves from the outside. It's in these comparisons that the value of what they had begins to crystallize. You weren't just another relationship. You were a mirror, a comfort, a challenge to grow. That kind of bond isn't easily replaced. And yet the realization doesn't always come with action. Many avoidants, when faced with the weight of what they lost, don't reach out. Not because they don't want to, but because pride, fear, and emotional paralysis keep them stuck. Some won't know what to say. Others will assume too much time has passed, so they live with the quiet ache of regret, replaying what went wrong, recognizing that what they once minimized was, in fact, profound. This is the paradox of avoidant loss. At first, it looks like nothing, but with time, it becomes everything. You may have walked away thinking your presence didn't matter, but the truth is it mattered so deeply that only distance and time could make them feel it. Not in a flash of clarity, but in a slow, unfolding grief that whispers, "You lost something real. You can't be replaced." You are a mirror of growth they weren't ready for. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, emotional intimacy isn't just challenging, it's confronting. It brings up everything they've worked so hard to keep buried. Their fears, their old wounds, their belief that they're better off alone. When you came into their life and offered a secure, honest connection, you didn't just bring affection, you brought accountability. Not the kind that pressures, but the kind that invites someone to be more emotionally available, more present, more whole. And that's terrifying for someone who has survived by shutting parts of themselves off. You represented growth. You represented the possibility of something deeper, something real, something that required them to show up in ways they weren't used to. And here's the truth. Growth is uncomfortable, especially when it means relearning how to trust, how to express, how to receive love without assuming it will vanish. For the avoidant, those are not just new skills, they're risks. And when faced with the challenge of change, many choose the comfort of what's familiar, even if that comfort is rooted in isolation. In your presence, they had glimpses of what real connection could feel like. They may have softened without realizing it. They may have opened up more than they ever had, but then they pulled back. Not because you asked for too much, but because being with you made them see how much they were holding back. You became a mirror to the parts of themselves they were avoiding. The unhealed past, the fear of losing control, the terror of actually being known. This is why, when they try to move on, it never quite feels the same. Other people might be attractive, fun, even seemingly less complicated, but those connections don't challenge them to grow. They don't require vulnerability. They don't ask for depth. They're easy but empty. And slowly, the avoidant starts to feel the void. Not just the void you left, but the void within themselves that you once held a light to. You weren't just offering a relationship, you were offering evolution. You are saying it's safe to feel here. You don't have to run anymore. But they weren't ready to accept that offer, not fully, not then. So they may have dismissed your love as too intense or your needs as too much, when in reality, your presence was exactly what they needed to grow. And that's what makes you irreplaceable. You weren't just someone they spent time with. You were a turning point, an invitation to become more emotionally available, more grounded, more honest. Losing you isn't just about losing a partner. It's about losing an opportunity to become a better version of themselves. And that realization doesn't go away. It lingers, often in silence, because people like you don't come around often. When you do, you change everything, even if they weren't ready to hold on to you when it mattered most. They don't come back the same, because life without you teaches what ego once denied. Avoidant individuals often convince themselves, consciously or not, that they don't need anyone. That if someone walks away, they'll be fine. That people are replaceable, relationships are risky, and solitude is safer. It's a protective mindset rooted in early survival, but it's also ego-driven. Ego tells them they're in control. Ego tells them that emotional detachment is strength. Ego tells them that if they push someone away, it's that person's fault for wanting too much. So when you finally left, or stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped proving your worth, something unexpected happened. Life didn't get easier. The quiet they thought they needed became unbearable. The freedom they thought they craved started to feel hollow. They began to see that you weren't trying to trap them or change them. You were simply trying to love them, to build something real. And for the first time, they had to sit with a version of reality that ego had protected them from, the possibility that they let something good go. Time apart does what arguments, logic, or even heartfelt conversations couldn't do in the moment. It humbles the avoidant mind. It chips away at the belief that they're always better off alone. They begin to notice how life feels without the emotional safety you brought. The loneliness is different now. It's not just being alone, it's being alone after experiencing real connection. That's what changes them. And when they come back, if they do, it's almost never with the same energy they left with. The arrogance softens. The emotional distance narrows. They may still struggle to express everything, but the walls don't feel as impenetrable. Because they've lived with the weight of your absence, and it taught them what ego never allowed them to admit: you mattered more than they were ready to say. But it's important to know, they're not just missing you, they're grieving who they were with you, the version of themselves that felt more understood, more emotionally seen, more grounded. You reflected back their potential. You offered a connection that wasn't built on control, but trust. They might try to recreate that dynamic elsewhere, but it won't work. Because what you gave came from a place of depth, not convenience. And that depth can't be faked, rushed, or substituted. So if they return, they come back altered. Not necessarily fully healed, not magically ready for everything they once ran from, but aware. Aware of what they lost, aware of what they didn't value in time, aware of what it means to have someone show up and stay, even when it's hard. And whether they say it or not, their return carries a silent truth. They learned the hard way that love like yours, and it's not replaceable. Because while ego made them push you away, life without you taught them exactly who you were.